Welcome to Chinwag Tuesdays, your passport to a world of language and culture. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Chinwag Tuesdays. I'm Amanda, and today's special guest is Ellie, an American accent coach who actually grew up in Australia and then moved to Serbia when she was in her late teens. So thank you so much for being here, Ellie.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really, really excited.
So how about you start off just telling us a little bit about yourself, what you do, and then we can get started.
Sure. So yeah, as you said, I am now no longer living in Australia. I'm actually in Europe and I live in Serbia. But I am actually an opera singer and an English teacher, which you'd be surprised, but it's not that uncommon. So, we musicians very often, there are a couple of reasons why. For example, someone says, I loved practicing, it was wonderful, but I couldn't get into the academy and like there's no point, I'm switching to something else. Or the opposite. They've been playing that instrument their entire life and then they're like, that's it, can't take it anymore, I'm done with this. And then they go off to something else. But because of the specific educational system, if you do go to like a music high school, which has all of the regular subjects from like a regular high school, then you have a very limited number of options later on. For example, you don't have math, you don't have physics, things like that. So then what you do is something that has to do with social studies. And very often, all of these musicians go on to study, I don't know, sociology, philosophy, history. And then again, we end up with not having a job and zero income. So it's something that you just gotta love a lot. But a lot of people also do languages. So that was sort of my story as well. I didn't get into the music academy, unfortunately, even though I thought that that was, something that I would be doing. And I actually visualized myself as an opera singer. And honestly, nothing else. I thought like that was it. But things didn't go as planned. And so then, you have to have an option B. My option was actually Russian first. And Serbian and Russian are very similar. So I thought, okay, I speak English, I speak Serbian. It would be logical to have a third language. That didn't go very well. I tried my best, but I couldn't keep up because even though we started from like A1 level, everything was moving so fast that I simply couldn't manage. And I realized when year 2 started that I wasn't able to keep this up. And so I thought, well, okay, I'm just going to have to leave uni. And still to this day, it's a big regret. I have to be honest. Hopefully I'll get back to it in some shape or form. And then I thought, well, let me just fall back on, what is safe and secure, which is English. I mean, I was teaching like on the side, and of course, there were lots of people that knew, that I could help them out with English in very different ways. So I was teaching pretty much from like the age of 18. So when I say like 14 years of experience, it really is 14 years of experience. But I never wanted that to be, back when I was younger, I never wanted that to be what I do later on. I just didn't really see myself teaching at a school, to be honest. But then, I mean, this was quite a while ago. I could never imagine that I could do this like online. That's another thing. And yeah, as time went on, I realized that I actually enjoy teaching and very different from music. So I finished my studies. And yeah, so bachelor degree, master's degree in English language and literature. And that's about it. But simultaneously to that, I was studying teaching English and I was actually working at the theater. So even though I didn't go to the music academy to become an like professional opera singer with a bachelor degree, I could still work with my previous education in opera singing. I could still get work. And so there was an audition at a theater and I got in. Funny thing was that the entire choir was there, which usually doesn't happen. It's usually just a couple of people. And
Yeah.
when I was entering the room, I was like, oh man, everyone's here. Because I didn't expect it. And so,
Yeah.
but it turned out to be a good thing because, then everyone got to hear me and get to know me immediately. And I got in and
Yeah.
started working there about a month later on. I did little projects before that, but I never thought that I could make like working at a theater a full-time job. I mean, it never turned
Yeah.
into a full-time job because
Yeah.
rehearsals don't last for 8 hours. They last for like 3 or 4 hours max.
Mm.
So I could balance teaching on the side. But when
Yeah.
I started at the theater, I was like, okay, well, I just have to make more time in my schedule. I never thought about stopping something. It was just like, okay, let's see where am I gonna,
How can I do both?
exactly. Like, we're just gonna have to squeeze this in. And yeah, I did all of that for many, many years. So basically, it had become this routine and this schedule. Plus, at some point, I had gym 3 to 4 times in the morning. Now, if you ask me how I did it, I have zero idea. I don't think I would be able to keep it up.
Oh,
But yeah,
yes.
so that was life for quite a while. And then
Wow.
all of a sudden, I realized, well, there must be more to this. Like I could probably create something, of
Yeah.
my own.
Yeah.
And around that time came the idea of like accent reduction, which I was doing while I was teaching, but I
Yeah.
never thought of doing only that. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
mm,
Wow. Oh my gosh. That's so interesting. It's so funny that you say that generally people in like the arts or music will kind of do languages on the side because there's an Australian YouTube account that I follow because she has a cultivated Australian accent, and that's kind of rare these days to have a cultivated
mhm.
Australian accent. I think like only 10% of the population have it now, and she's a speech pathologist. So
Oh,
I
nice.
sometimes, yeah. So her videos are really informative for pronunciation, and she's also an opera singer.
There you go.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
If you probably know of Rachel's English, I mean, I think she was one of the first who actually started on
Mm,
YouTube. And I watched one of her live videos. I don't remember when exactly. And she was like, yeah, well, I'm an opera singer. And I was like, oh, I knew it. I knew that there had to be something more. So yeah, that was
yeah,
pretty cool. And I was like, oh, there's more
yeah,
of us. Yay.
yeah,
So
yeah.
it makes sense. I mean, to be honest,
Mm,
because you have opera in Italian, and that's
yeah.
like the basically where everything started, let's put it that way. But
Mm,
then as it branched out, you have to sing in German, in French, in Russian. There's an opera in Czech. I also had to sing. And so you
wow.
have to get used to faking pronunciation in different languages. And so
Yeah.
you you also have to find your own way of writing down the transcription, of course,
Mm,
based off of the language that you write. Serbian, for example, is very interesting because when it comes to spelling, it's incredibly easy. The
yeah.
sound that you create has a letter. And so you
Yeah.
never have to think
Opposite
about
to
spelling.
English.
Exactly, exactly. So, for example, like if you want to create the ch sound in chips, there's a letter for ch, and
Yeah.
that's it. And you just write that
Yeah.
down. And so that was pretty much the way that we would write in our notes, like me and all my fellow opera singers when I was part of the choir. And then you would just see us like writing scribbles, above
Yeah.
or below, for example, German or French text. And if you
Yeah.
saw that, you might think, what the heck? But it's actually pretty interesting because we were writing down the transcription of what we heard when we had someone
Mm,
professional come in and read it to us. So, and we had
okay.
separate rehearsals where we had, not for every single opera, but for a couple of them,
Mm,
especially if we were doing a new production, you had someone come in and
yeah.
all they do is just read bit by bit and you write down
Okay.
because
Yeah.
we have to make it sound, you know, pretty
Yeah.
convincing. So,
Yeah. Wow. So, like, I know that you're fluent in English and Serbian, and you said that you kind of have to know bits and pieces of other languages from
Yeah,
your singing. But so, what
yeah.
other languages do you know that you're obviously not fluent in? But tell me all about the other languages.
Right. Well, yeah, that's now that I think about it, it's like a mishmash of a lot of different things. So
Yeah.
I studied because I had the desire to learn other languages, of course, but like back in school, I remember in Australia we had French. So that was
Yeah.
something that I had to. You
Mhm.
probably had the same as well. But to be honest, the moment I left, it was like everything just
Yeah.
left, you know.
I
So
just remember how to say my name and I'm sorry.
yeah, yeah, that's it.
That's all I remember. I did French just for 2 years. And I
Right.
think I'm sorry is je suis désolé. I think is I'm
Mm,
sorry. Now I can't remember my name. I just said it to
je
a student
m'appelle.
the other
I
day.
think it's je
That's
m'appelle.
it.
And
Yeah,
that's
je
it.
m'appelle. Yeah, je m'appelle. Yeah, je m'appelle Amanda. That's all I
Ta-da!
remember.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the thing is, when you do opera and when you work with students, and you've had students from all around the world as well, I've noticed that you sort of pick up on what they want to say and how they're formulating their sentence. And there really
Mm,
are like stereotypes, let's say, depending on what language they speak and their entire
yeah.
thought process. So very
Yeah.
often what would happen is that I would, even though the student hasn't said the word, and even though it's not like a phrase or something that we typically use, I could
Mm,
sort of figure out what they wanted to say. And then I'm like,
yeah.
you mean, and they'd go like, oh, you can read minds. I'm like, no, I just had so many French speakers, Spanish speakers, and so on.
Yeah.
So going back to what languages I had to study, so it was French. So if you're an opera singer, you have 4 years of Italian. So that was a
Mm-hmm.
must. Then when I was studying English at uni, I had Spanish as
Mm-hmm.
like a second language there. And then Spanish and Italian, okay, they're very similar,
Yeah.
which for me was a big problem. I would constantly get them mixed up. So,
Oh, I was
what?
actually going to ask that. Do you ever get them mixed up?
Yep, I do. I do. It's a nightmare. So, for example, okay, yes, and at uni I studied Russian for that 1 year and continue on with that. But Serbian and Russian I don't mix for some
Mm.
reason, but Italian and Spanish I do. Like it's a nightmare. So, they would have to have a lot of patience with me, I think. And then through students and knowing Italian and Spanish, I understand a lot of Portuguese. It's
Mm-hmm.
difficult for me if I was to listen to Portuguese, especially when I have students from Brazil, because their accent is a
Mm-hmm.
bit different. And that's really, really difficult for me to decipher. But Portuguese from Portugal is a little bit easier. And so I can
Mm-hmm.
sort of figure out when, you have like a entry level student or A1, A2 student, and they use some of their words, like, oh, you mean this? And they're like, yes, yes. So,
Yeah.
that was sort of it. So these were all the
Mm-hmm.
languages that I had to learn. Plus
Yeah.
German, I decided to study because I had this crazy idea of going to Vienna and moving to Vienna, even though that never happened. I do have a lot of friends there. And so I thought that maybe sometime in the future I could, do that. That never
Mm-hmm.
actually came true, might in the future, I don't know. But German was interesting, and actually knowing English helps tremendously. So I couldn't
Wow.
connect to
Okay.
any other language. So I had to, rely a lot on English, but then sentence structures are a bit weird in German. So,
Mm-hmm.
and was there anything else? No, I think that was, yes, there is. I almost forgot. Turkish. Now,
Okay.
why Turkish? There are a lot of similar words between Serbian people and the Turkish because we were under the
Mm.
Ottoman Empire for 500 years. So a
Right.
lot of their
Okay.
words have stuck. And
Mm.
so sometimes words that I didn't even think about or didn't even realize could have a root that's like, a Turkish word or maybe it's our word, but they took it, but it doesn't matter, you know?
Yeah.
Anyway, I would be like, oh, I know exactly what you mean. So this was more common when we would talk about food and like how stuff, like things around the house, parts of the house,
Yeah.
furniture, things in the kitchen, stuff like that. So, but
Yeah.
so that was also a language that I could master in a way when I had like entry or A1 level students. So
Yeah.
what can I say? It's like an accumulation of experience, education,
Yeah.
historic background, and things like that.
Yeah. Wow, incredible.
Yeah.
Now, you sort of said that you started teaching around 18, but it was not
Mhm.
something that you really envisioned yourself doing permanently or full time. But how did
Yeah.
you get into accent reduction and the American accent?
So basically, living here and also being back in Australia, everyone was always like, "Oh, you have such a lovely American accent," and I'm like, "Oh, thanks." And I never really thought about it too much, to be honest.
Yeah.
And I always thought that it was something because I'm a musician and like, okay, I guess I
Mm,
can imitate pretty well, and that's the end of that. But then I realized, well, when I talk to my students for a while and sometimes I might correct a word or something like that, they start to pick up the way that I speak. And
hmm.
everyone would always say, I had other teachers from the States, but I wasn't able to understand them, but I can understand you. And then I thought,
Okay.
why? But I tend to speak just a bit slower and
Mm,
I don't have a regional accent. So
yeah. Yeah.
I think you can say that I have like a general American
Yeah.
accent. Someone might even
Mhm.
say it resembles a Canadian one, for example. But I think that a lot of students were able to deal with that. Maybe the next step would be someone from a specific part of the States, right?
Yeah.
But that was something that I kept hearing again and again and again. And
Mm,
it just didn't click. Like all the information was there, but it just never clicked. And then at one point, I had a friend from university when I studied Russian, and she was like, why don't you do accent reduction? And I'm like,
yeah.
what do you mean? And then I started thinking about it like, okay, but like, who's going to want to learn that? Especially from
Yeah.
me. I mean, I live here.
Yeah.
And then I had another friend who had been taking a course, and then he was like, well, this is something that, you know, you can definitely do, especially with your background, like I've been doing it. It's working well. And then
Yeah.
I thought, okay, there's already two people that are very successful in their own businesses, and I sort of trust them. And
Hmm.
then COVID happened, and, you know, all of everything just completely changed. We
Yeah.
were in lockdown, working at the theater. You can't go there, so you can't have a rehearsal. You can't
Mm,
do a show. You can't do anything. And so they pay you to stay at home, but you know they're not going to do that forever. So you have to find another solution.
yeah.
So basically, it was at that time. I mean, I don't know how it was for you, but like I was working pretty much nonstop because I realized I have to work now. I don't know what's
Hmm.
going to happen in the future. Plus, I have students booking like 10 hours a day if I open them, you know, like I'm fully
Yeah.
booked.
Yeah.
So I think that was sort of the turning point when I realized
Hmm.
I can't work that much.
Yeah.
Plus, who knows if I will ever go back to the theater and what will happen there. Unfortunately, I didn't go back.
Hmm.
I do things on the side, but I never went back to working at the theater as I used to. So, and then I just thought, okay, well, I would probably not make that change by myself. So then
Mm,
circumstances made me, you know, come up
yeah.
with something else. And then yeah, I
Yeah.
just switched to accent reduction, and that was that.
Yeah. Okay. I feel like I've interviewed a few people now, and the most common phrase I'm hearing is, and then COVID happened. But the same thing
Yeah.
happened to me. Like, actually, I wasn't allowed to work for a number of years when I moved to India because of visa restrictions. So then, eventually I was allowed to work. And then, I had this freedom of being able to work. And yeah, I just went crazy, like opening my schedule and working so many hours. And I didn't have boundaries with my students. So if someone said, oh, I want like a class at 11 o'clock at night, yeah, sure, I'll do it.
Yeah.
Now I'm very, very much having boundaries because you get burnt out. It's not sustainable for a long run. But yeah, teaching is something that came to me because of COVID and living in
Mm-hmm.
India. Whereas this is not what I did in Australia at all. Like
Mm-hmm.
I've worked
Mm-hmm.
in customer service before. I did my higher education in hotel hospitality management. I worked in hotels, in hotel management for like 6 years, then moved into insurance. I was a claims assessor, yeah, in the insurance industry.
Right. Yeah,
Anyway,
yeah,
so
yeah.
yes, then COVID happened and yeah, the opportunity came up. But yeah, so that's a very, very common phrase. Then COVID
You can
happened.
you can make like a specific video where all of us have said the same thing.
Yeah, yeah, actually, yes. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think it's like with me included, I think maybe you're the fourth or fifth person to now say that COVID
Mm-hmm.
happened and, that's how they either got into teaching like myself, or maybe they were doing two things and then made the shift to teaching permanently because of the pandemic, and
Exactly.
you're kind of
Yeah.
forced to make those decisions.
You mentioned time and setting boundaries, and that was
Mm,
another thing which not just in teaching, but what I realized I can do when I teach is set my own hours. Which I wasn't able to do that because theater was always number one. And then I
mm,
would squeeze in, my lessons wherever I could. And I could do that daily. But if something
yeah.
happens at the theater, for example, they would send us a message the day before,
Hmm.
and they might be like, well, the rehearsal isn't at 11 a.m. anymore. Now it's at like 4 p.m. And it
Uh,
was sort of okay for me, but for other people that have other serious obligations, it was
hmm.
very, stressful. But they were
Hmm.
hired full time. I had a different kind of a contract. And so I was like, okay, well, sometimes I could say, oh, sorry, I'm sick, I can't. But
You
I
would chuck
think
a
I might.
sickie.
Exactly. Yes, yes. I love that phrase, by the way. It's so cool. I think I chucked the Siki only once, but they couldn't get out of it. So when I saw
Mm,
that, I was like, I don't want my life to be like this in the future.
yeah,
So it was always something that was at the back of my mind, but for some reason I thought that I had to stay at the theater. That was another thing. Like
yeah,
I was given this
yeah.
opportunity where a very limited number of people in not in Belgrade, in Serbia, were
Hmm.
doing this specific thing. Lots of other people were being educated to potentially do the same thing I was doing. And here I am thinking of maybe giving it up at some point in the
Yeah,
future. And I was like, oh, how can I be so ungrateful? What am I thinking about?
yeah.
But going back to boundaries and things like that, when you're your own boss and you learn to respect yourself and your own boundaries, time, body, needs, and all of that, you understand that
Hmm.
the circumstances that you're in just aren't good for you. And so,
Yeah.
in a way, being let go after everything started and the theater had a lot of financial problems and things like that, I realized it's a blessing in disguise.
Hmm.
And it's good that it happened. I saw some of my
Yeah.
former coworkers yesterday, actually, and most of them are older than me. But while I
Hmm.
was looking at them, I I had this certain kind of sadness because they like what they do. When they go on
Hmm.
stage, they like what they do, really, and they've dedicated their lives to this, but they're not respected enough. And
Yeah.
that's what's slowly but surely driving your motivation down, and you're constantly trying
Hmm.
to maintain that, but everything else behind the scenes is not functioning at all, not just
Hmm.
here, in any theater really. And so
Yeah.
it's just a mess. But the people that come to see the show, they just see all the glitz and they're like, ah, it's so wonderful, it must be so
Mm.
cool. But you're thinking,
Yeah.
all of these things, like for example, they're not going to alter my dress. I've gained a little bit of weight and they say don't have money to do that. So we had to
Mm.
like rip apart a part of the dress, sew it back on. Like you don't see any of that. And so you can't do your
Yeah.
job properly. And yet you have to go and be like, everything's awesome. I'm
Ta-da!
dying on the inside, but it's cool.
Yeah.
So those were the things that as I was getting older and my life was going into a certain different direction, I realized there's gonna have to be an end to this because I can't
Yeah.
keep it up. And then, like you said, I also did the same thing while I was teaching, where I would spend pretty much the entire day, especially when we had to be at home. So I think it was about
Mm.
after 6 p.m., you couldn't leave your house, something like that.
Mm.
So I thought, nah, why not? I'll just work.
Yeah.
But then you get burnt out, and I told myself I am no longer working in the evening. So actually,
Yeah.
now I work from 12 to 4. That's it. And
Yeah.
also weekends. Sunday, I decided to take off, and then I saw students were booking Saturday. So I'm like, okay, awesome, great. Monday to Friday, I'm also thinking of getting rid of one other day. And like, that's it. From
Yeah.
12 to 4, I'm done. And it
Yeah.
works wonderfully.
That's
All the
good.
students have their own slots, everything
Yeah.
works great. So, and I'm a lot
Yeah.
happier.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Like as we've talked about before, I'm in the process of going independent, and it's something that I've really tried to make sure that I'm being really strict to myself about, is keeping my set schedule. And I think that's one of the benefits of having my own kind of booking schedule system rather than being on a platform, because on there students can see you, they can book, and I kind of feel like I'm having to open up more time slots because I have my paid regulars that need to book in. But there's no free time slots because trials are booking and things like that. So
Right.
yeah, I've definitely tried to set some strict boundaries with myself to make sure that, yeah, I'm not doing overtime. Because like at the moment, I'm doing it's not uncommon for me to be doing a 7-hour teaching day, 5 days a week. So I've cut
Wow.
that back to, I'm doing 5-hour days. So like I'm satisfied with that. And like, I think there's some days that I don't have I'm not completely booked out yet, but May is still around the corner. So it's okay. But yeah, I think 5 hours is like reasonable for me. Eventually, I'd like to maybe cut that down to 4 hours a day. But yeah, it's still a big, big change doing 5 hours when I'm doing 7 or 8 hours a day, because you do get burnt out very, very quickly.
That's the thing. When you work with students, for example, I currently have a lot of Spanish students, and they sometimes squeeze in our lesson during their lunch break or something like that. And very often I think, how do you have energy for this? When you've worked before and you're going to continue working afterwards. And our lessons, I sometimes feel like, are like meetings. So imagine being 7 hours in a meeting, or different meetings. So back when, we would work on platforms, you would have 30-minute sessions, and so, or 25, doesn't matter. But, if you have 4 students in 4 hours, that's a lot easier to manage. And you sort of go into this process with the student in that 1 hour or 50-minute session, it depends. And you can always like circle back at the end, and you have enough time to do something with them. It's not like, oh, hi. And then you're like, okay, that's it. See ya. That's, at least to me, that's what 25-minute sessions feel like. And also because we have students from pretty much all around the world, it's a different view of life, different cultural background, different, and you get to know them as well. So you're very invested in who they are, what their story is, how to help them. So switching between 4 people in 4 hours or 8 people in 4 hours is a very different story. So that's why we got to limit ourselves. And I'm usually like 1 hour session, no longer than that. I can't do it. It's actually 50 minutes. It's not even an hour, it's 50 minutes. Because if we have to extend something, sure, but you want to go to the toilet and like grab a drink or something before your next
quick
thing.
meal break.
So exactly.
Yeah.
So I think those work out.
Yeah. So what do you enjoy most about your work doing the accent reduction?
I'd have to say that the part I enjoy the most are maybe the first couple of lessons, like first 3 or 4 sessions, where the student first comes terrified and very
Mm-hmm.
confused. They have no idea what they actually want. So you have to help them define their goal. And there always has to be a goal. So anybody that was like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, I just want to improve my accent, you're like, well, okay, that's nice, but that's not going to work.
Yeah.
So we have to see
Yeah.
why you're doing this. It's
Yeah.
your reason, whatever it may be, it's legit, but we just have to, define that and then see what we're going to do with it. So
Mm-hmm.
taking it from that to them realizing within usually within 3 sessions, they finally get into this flow and they start realizing themselves. So for example, they notice when they haven't pronounced the th correctly. They understand when there's
Yeah.
an ing at the end and it's not running, but it's running, right?
Yeah.
And so they stop themselves before the G and
Yeah.
things like that. So, and you see them thinking and you see them
Mm.
opening up their mind for something that's different to what they're used to, yet it's everywhere around them. So they're just
Yeah.
basically now fishing for the information that they already know,
Mm-hmm.
but they now know what they're looking for. And so
Yeah.
that's at least that's the way that I see it through their
Mm-hmm.
eyes and what they show me. And that's the transition that I love the most, I think, because that's
Yeah.
when they realize, oh my God, I can do this, you know. And I
Yeah.
always tell them there are no specific rules that you have to sit down and learn because we will repeat them thousands of times in all
Mm-hmm.
these texts and exercises and things that there will never be a reason for you to sit down and study it because you're gonna
Yeah.
repeat it again and again. It will just become a part of how you think and who you are and how you pronounce it. And that's the beauty of
Yeah.
accent reduction is that it's
Mm.
nothing that you have to sit down and study. It's muscle memory. And the more you
Yeah.
do it, the more it becomes a part of who you are and how you speak.
Yeah.
And so
Mm-hmm.
it's nothing scary. It really,
Mm-hmm.
I know I'm going to sound cheesy now, but it really is like a transformational process because it is a
Yeah.
transformation. So, but then at the
Yeah.
same time, what's interesting is that I have students that, and that's actually the majority, they don't want to have an American accent. They want to have a
Mm.
neutral accent.
Okay.
And so I had a student from Australia, and she was like,
Mm-hmm.
"I know you teach American English, but I still want to talk to you because I think she speaks Spanish." And she was
Mm-hmm.
like, "People don't understand me. There's something that I'm doing wrong." And I'm like, "First of all, you're not doing anything wrong. The language that you speak is like your default setting. And
Yeah.
that's what you always go back to as like your
Mm-hmm.
safe zone that you're used to. And so the sounds that you were given learning your mother tongue are the sounds that you are using when you speak English. If
Yeah.
you were living in South Africa or you were living in the US, some of these sounds would work better, for example, in South Africa than they would in the US. So also
Yeah.
where you are, and she happens to live, I think it was Queensland,
Mm-hmm.
in Australia. So I was like, okay, then the vowels are different there, for example. So,
Mm-hmm.
you have to decide how you want to sound.
Yeah.
And that was something like a conscious decision that she had to make. And she said,
Mm-hmm.
neutral. Let's find out what are the sounds that I struggle with the most, which when they speak Spanish is the letters T, D, S, and Z. And these are the
Yeah.
four that, depending on what Spanish speaking country they're from, these
Mm-hmm.
sounds can sometimes sound exactly the same. So you have four that can sound the same, and that
Mm-hmm.
can be a mess. And so just helping them to differentiate them and to sound as clear as possible along the
Yeah.
process. It sounds like you're not doing much, but
Mm-hmm.
you completely transform the way that they speak. So they never actually have to
Yeah.
think about vowels and other sounds or
Yeah.
anything like that. They can just focus on these four. And once that's set, and that's what I did with her. But having lived in Australia, I also told her this is how they would say it there. And then
Yeah.
she'd say, okay, I'm actually used to saying it like that. And so then she would write down the words that she's comfortable saying, like the Aussies do. And then, she's like, okay, I'm just going to stick to that and keep that. This
Yeah.
I'm still not okay with. So this entire process of them coming up with what their goal is, slowly discovering what they can do and how to get to it, and then
Yeah.
at the end seeing them not even realize that they've made it. That's also pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I love that. I love teaching for the same reasons actually. I love like when you see the kind of light bulb go off in their mind and they're like when
Yes.
they realize something or they start like self-correcting on things that previously they didn't know, whether it is like pronunciation or like I do a lot of work with connected speech. So when they like knowing where to link or like knowing where to reduce something into the schwa sound, and I get so excited.
Yeah, it is. Where are most of your students from as far as like the languages that they speak when you do accent reduction?
So I have a lot of Spanish speakers at the moment. Yeah, I have a lot of students from also South America and some from Brazil, so Portuguese. So yeah, most of them are from South America, and then I've got some Asian students, mostly from Taiwan or Hong Kong. But I've got a mix of like the ones who are wanting to just improve their speaking skills. Most of them come to me to improve speaking and to sort of understand the Australian accent a bit better. But the accent reduction side is kind of mixed. Like I don't have too many at the moment, but the ones that I did have before were mostly from Asia.
Right. Yeah. Back in the the day of like teaching in one of those platforms that we were all on but wanted to leave very quickly.
Yes, I know.
We mostly had students. What was it like? China, Korea, Japan. I think that was like the Bermuda Triangle of all the students that we've ever had. I mean, they were
Well,
lovely,
mine were
but
like,
it was pretty much the only offer that you had as far as students from Asia. That's what I meant. So
yeah. I think for me, with my work hours and my time zone, my morning slots were always Korean and Japanese students, and then my afternoon slots were always Saudis and Turkish or Turks.
yeah.
Yeah. So those were like my four main countries. I rarely got someone from Europe. Yeah, it just didn't fit into my time zone. It was good though. It kind of helped prepare me for what I do now.
When you mentioned Saudi students, I have to say that some of the most interesting stories that I've had and were with them. And statistically, okay, there were always more men, but they were always very respectful and very nice. And I liked the fact that they were always trying to, not just the men, the women as well, but they were always focusing on education, and it was always about like a cultural exchange, and the conversations were very fruitful. And
I agree.
working on that platform was actually eye-opening, because I never would have been able to have students from Saudi Arabia otherwise, but I was like, okay, this is new and interesting. And I always tell this story. I think all of my previous students know this. I had a lovely student from Kuwait, and he was actually working on the border with Saudi Arabia, if I'm not mistaken. And so he was traveling to work and then back for about an hour. And back then on the platform, you could have 7 days a week, 2 hours. Do you remember that? They were able to have that package.
Yes.
Yep.
I had a student who would do this 5 days a week, 2 hours a day. With me. Yeah, but he would do it 2 hours a day, 7 days a week. Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Right. I had that just one student, but we spoke every single day for a couple of months actually.
Yeah.
But he knew that I had work, and so then we made it work, like him going home or driving to the place where I think it was a construction site. Anyway, so yeah, we'd speak every single day. The stories I heard about, his family, like very, very different life. But I just remember thinking, this is so cool. Of course, I'm teaching, but like I'm learning about a completely different life, culture, everything. Sometimes I miss it, I have to be honest, because now I have students from Europe because of the time zones and everything. But yeah, they were great. They were really lovely. So being exposed to certain platforms has its advantages, because you'll get students that otherwise you probably wouldn't be able to meet.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
All right. So, is there anything that you miss about Australia, and how do you fill that void or fill that gap?
Well, yeah, ever since you and I've started talking, I have more and more things that I miss.
I'm
I was
reminding you of
thinking
different
about,
things.
yes, yes, you are. Honestly, I was thinking about it today and I was like, why do I have this longing to go back to Australia for like 2 weeks or something? And then I
Yeah.
realized, oh yeah, especially when I saw the two kangaroos fighting in front of a pub, I was like, that I miss that. But the point is
Yeah.
that something which I enjoy very much, of course, is the beach, because
Yeah.
pretty much wherever you live, you've got access to the beach. I mean, not exactly everywhere, but most cities, right? And
Yeah.
so that was just a part of the city where
Hmm.
you live in, a part of maybe not everyday life, but you'd go to the beach once per week, once per month.
Hmm.
The school would take you there. There were different trips, things like that.
Yeah.
I miss Taronga Zoo.
Oh,
Yes,
yes. There's beautiful views there, isn't there?
yes, yes, absolutely, absolutely. But then I think it's primarily the wildlife, I have to be honest. I mean, most of the people that I had connections with, I'm simply not in touch with them anymore. So
Mm.
there's no one that I'd like to see again per se, but
Yeah.
just going down certain streets that I remember, from my younger years and then seeing how things have changed, I'd like to see that. But
Yeah.
also just being able to experience all the wildlife, minus the spiders if I can avoid them, and the flying cockroaches. That's
Oh,
still
yeah.
is just I can't. But everything else, yes. Um,
Yeah.
and there's another thing which I discovered in the meantime, which is tiny houses that are
Mm.
parked like in the middle of nowhere. People have land from their parents, grandparents. They'll,
Yeah.
live in a self-sustaining way. And there's a YouTube channel, I forgot what it's called. I think Living Big Tiny Journey, something like that. But anyway,
Hmm.
the guy's name is Bryce, and he's really, really nice. And he travels between New Zealand and Australia mostly, and
Yeah.
then does tiny houses there. And I was like,
Oh,
oh,
how cool.
you live like this? But I think I've watched his channel for the past 10 years. I mean, I was a fanatic at one point, and all I could ever talk
Yeah.
about were tiny houses. So, and then I was like, okay, I have to go to Australia and,
Yeah.
maybe stay in one of these. So I'd
Yeah.
say primarily wildlife and just nature
Yeah.
there, because it's something I
Yeah.
can't experience anywhere else. Ah, by the way, did you
Yeah.
have as a kid, because I remember this, they brought an echidna at one point and we were able to pet it. And I remember, how we would all sit on the floor, like
Yeah.
wherever, like the playground, the classroom, doesn't really
Yeah.
matter. And so they'd have us in the playground sitting all in a circle, and they would get this echidna out, and it was like walking around, and then us as like the kids, like we're trying to pet it, and it's like, oh, but can I, it's got spikes, but like
Yeah.
it's fine. And so I remember that, like, being introduced to certain elements of Australia through school, and because it was
Yeah.
so diverse, I also liked that aspect. And
Yeah.
there was another thing that I remember in high school, which was that they were basically, I don't remember what the class was exactly. I don't remember the name, but we had to do some research. And so you would
Mm.
either go to the library and then, discover things there, read encyclopedias, things like that, or use the computer room and then find out stuff over there. But you had to do presentations, you had to write
Mm.
reports, you had to write articles. And so when I moved here and I realized that kids didn't have that here, I was like, oh, they were creating little journalists. How
Ah,
nice.
yeah.
But I remember that that was something which was tremendously useful. And the
Yeah.
things I learned in school back in Sydney, I could later use with my students when we were prepping for the Cambridge exams, IELTS, and so on,
Hmm.
because it was pretty much the same thing. And I just remember
Yeah.
thinking, thank God that I went through that, because I wasn't aware of it. It was just a subject. but it was
Yeah.
pretty cool. So that's
Yeah.
one, for example, educational aspect that I really liked.
Hmm. Yeah, great. Well, I hope you get to go back one day and get to experience all of that again.
I hope so too. I mean, I every time I renew my passport, I'm just like, I should really go. Why am I doing
Yeah.
this then? You know, but I
Yeah.
will, I'm sure.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So before we finish up today, how can anyone contact you if they're interested in learning more about the American accent or accent reduction?
Sure. So I think that the safest bet is Instagram. So you
Hmm.
can find me at Accent Tune. So that's a
Hmm.
double T. And yeah, I don't have a boatload of videos, but you can pretty much tell the way that I teach and some of the methods that I use.
Hmm.
But primarily like I mentioned, the sessions are about 50 minutes each, which I think is ideal for both of us. There's
Yep.
a lot of material that we go through. There's a lot of homework material that you also get.
Hmm.
And so anything that, students that might be interested, if they want to ask, they can always DM me. I'm more than happy to answer. I do have a TikTok as well, but I'm just, I don't know, I'm not as active there, honestly. So the safest
Yeah.
bet
Yeah. I can relate
is,
to that. Yeah.
yeah, it's just Instagram. So, and yeah,
Cool.
anything that they see might be missing as far as information, they can
Mhm.
send me a message and I'll be more than happy to reply.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. It was absolutely lovely.
It's been great.